On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors fall in a dud to the Washington Wizards. I'm going to tell you why I'm a little bit concerned about the Toronto Raptors offense, which has actually been a surprising strength all season long. We'll dig into the need to find some core lineups for the in-between moments of games, and we got the good, the bad, and the all that and so much more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1352 of Locked On Raptors for Friday, March the 3rd. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all of my work over on Twitter, at Woodley Sean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps. And of course, we are on YouTube. Please go hit the big red subscribe button on the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. As we push towards 3,000 subs, we're almost there. If we could get there over the weekend, I would be very, very grateful to all of the folks in our lovely Locked On Raptors family. So thank you for participating, supporting the show, all that good stuff. Let's get to it on today's show. Breaking down a 119-108 loss to the Washington Wizards. A real bummer of a game, man. Like, you come in, you have 1-8 of 10, everyone's feeling good. You have that great fourth quarter from Scotty Barnes against the Bulls on Tuesday. You look at 2 games against the Wizards, who the Raptors have owned in recent history. I believe coming into this one, 11 of the last 13. The Raptors had beaten Washington. They got those stupid pink jerseys, and it's like, all right, this team is ripe for the beating. You go down 10-0, you go on an 18-2 run in response, and you think, all right, here we go. Things are going to be all right with the Raptors, and they're going to be able to put some distance between them and the Wizards. Instead, not so much. One of the more, I think, uninspiring games the Raptors have played this season. I don't think it's like an embarrassing sort of, DEFCON 1 level loss or anything like that, but certainly didn't get enough from way too many guys up and down the roster. We'll get into Nick Nurse's rotation weirdness coming up later on. We got the good, the bad, and the We'll dig into Fred VanVleet's shooting struggles last night and a lot more. But first, let's start with my sort of big takeaway from this game, which is that I'm a little concerned about the Toronto Raptors offense. And look, there's degrees of concern, right? Do I think that the Raptors are going to plummet to the depths that they did at the worst points of this season, where their offense was like literally the worst half-court offense in the NBA? No, probably not. And the numbers suggest that that's not happening right now either, but there's just some stuff, some sort of underlying numbers under the hood and just some like anecdotal observation stuff that's got me feeling a little bit worried about the next 18 games, most specifically. Do I think it's something that's going to carry on long term? It could. We'll talk about some reasons why that could be, but mostly I'm concerned about the offense really hitting its groove between now and the end of the season. There's a very limited runway to work with here, and they don't have a lot of time to find that cohesion offensively. And look, you might just say, hey, Sean, the numbers with Jakob Poeltl on the floor have been fantastic. They're scoring wonderfully, and that's totally true. They are scoring really well with Jakob Poeltl on the floor. The starting lineup that they've rolled at the last 2 games with Yak and Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, scoring better than 119 points per 100 possessions, which would be right among the top offenses in the league. The defense has been ridiculous. It's at like 100 defensive rating right now. That's amazing to see, but it's a small sample. And again, I still think a lot of the sort of underlying stuff and the stuff over the course of the game in which those guys are not on the floor is giving me a little bit of concern about the offense and its ability to find some juice. Over the last 8 games since Jakob Poeltl arrived, the Raptors have the 20th best offense in the NBA, which when you factor in how good it's been with Yak on the floor, it's been real bad otherwise, which goes to the staggering questions we're going to get into in a little bit. But like, this was a thing I talked about, I think like 3 days after the trade, my concern with spacing and just the cramped nature of what the Raptors were going to run into. And that's happened, right? Scotty Barnes, I think in particular, is still finding his best spot to slot in. And in fairness to him, he's been asked to play a whole bunch of different roles already in the last 8 games. More of a wing role, kind of adapting from his middle of the floor, sort of small ball center role that he was really excelling in January, then he goes to be more of a wing. Then Fred VanVleet goes out for 3 games and he becomes the point guard to not so great results in terms of overall offensive performance. And then he's moved back to more of a wing role in the last couple of games here. And I just think it's totally understandable that he's struggling to find those spots in the offense where he's really cooking, but it's very real. It's happening. The lack of space is real. The Raptors are actually getting worse shots on the board per cleaning the glass than they were before the Jakob Poeltl trade. And again, I don't think this is stuff that's going to carry on long term. I think Yak breathes a whole lot of life into the offense, and it's a good thing for a lot of reasons. But right now, they're struggling. They're struggling with the spacing. They're struggling in terms of getting to the rim a little bit more than they used to. They're down a couple percentage points in terms of their rim frequency per cleaning the glass, and their shot quality overall has gone down by a little bit as well. Before the Jakob Poeltl trade, they were 21st in location effective field goal percentage, which is a number on cleaning the glass, which is a great website. Lots of great advanced metrics to look at. If you haven't checked it out, it's worth it. A subscriber. Shout out to Ben Falk. But the location effective field goal percentage is essentially what would your expected effective field goal percentage be if an average player was taking shots from all the places you're getting shots from the floor. And this skews towards teams that have good rim frequency and take a lot of threes. Those are the teams that have a higher location effective field goal percentage. If you're hanging out in the mid-range, if you are not taking the best shots, if you're taking, just from the spots that you don't want to be analytically speaking, then your location effective field goal percentage is going to go down. The Raptors were 21st in this metric before Jakob Poeltl arrived. They are 25th in the league with a slight drop from 54.7, their expected effective field goal percentage, down to 54.1 in the last 8 games since Jakob Poeltl arrived. They also are down to 18th in corner three-point rate, and they were number 10 in corner three-point rate before the trade as well. So they're just figuring out how all these things work together, right? It's been a little bit hodgepodge in terms of who's been available. It's all understandable, but it's going to take some time, and I do think it might take too much time for them to really hit their full offensive gear before the end of the season. Thankfully, the defense has been absurd, and to sort of go back to the numbers on Jakob Poeltl, yes, he's helped the offense a little bit per cleaning the glass. He's the team's 1.2 points per 100 possessions better offensively when he's on the floor. That's an improvement. That's nice. But they're 28.7 points per 100 better on defense when he's on the floor, which is ultimately the thing that's going to save this Raptors season. They are 11th in defense since Jakob Poeltl arrived. Of course, they were flirting with the bottom 10 before he got in town, and that only figures to improve now that they have their full complement of guys. Like the defense, I'm not worried about, despite some defensive misgivings against the Wizards, which we'll get into, mostly not in the half court, more so in transition. But, offensively, Yak has helped, but he's not helped the same degree that he's helped on defense, right? It's been exponentially more impactful for the defense than it has been the offense. And just the general lack of three-point shooting hurts. You have less guys right now who are hot. You have Fred VanVleet going through a swoon. OG just getting back into the groove, which is great to see. But Scottie Barnes is not a great three-point shooter right now. That's going to be a massively important skill for him to hone over the offseason. He should be locked in the gym and forced to shoot 1,000 three-pointers every single game if the Raptors are, directing his development properly over the course of the offseason. It's a massive swing skill for this team to make it all work, because as much as we love the big-to-big passing and what Yak does in the middle of the floor, the offensive rebounding the Raptors are able to do with their size and with their selling out to go grab offensive boards to bolster their offense, they still need half-court efficiency and production. And while it's come in spurts with Jakob Poeltl, there are still these little pockets where, even Pascal Siakam doesn't look totally comfortable in his spots all the time. His touches are down a little bit. I still think he's going to be fine. But last night, not a great game from him. No field goals in the second half, just 13 points overall. Had 6 assists. He's still excellent. I'm not worried about Pascal Siakam, but there's a lot of change going on right now. And I do think Scottie Barnes is shooting, coupled with the fact that the other key three-point shooters on the team have not been super hot of late. OG, the exception the last couple of games here, which is really great to see. He was awesome last night. But it's just, there's a little bit of pressure in terms of that offense. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of, not so much in terms of like sharing the ball, the tension that we talked about earlier in the year, but there's just like, there's not a ton of space for these guys to operate in. People aren't worried about Scotty Barnes shooting right now. Pascal Siakam is a hot and cold 3-point shooter, which is, he was 1 of 5 last night. He's 2 of 10, I think, over his last 2 games. And you notice the difference when he's cold, and it's just there's not a lot of life being breathed into those offensive sets where it's coming to a 3-point shooter who you feel comfortable with. And that's just something to watch. I'm not saying it's like a doom spelling issue for the Raptors or anything like that. When Jakob Poeltl's on the floor, they've been very, very good. But in terms of just like the health of the offense, there have been great sequences of beautiful ball movement and incredible cutting and off-ball action and all of this stuff. But it hasn't been common enough, and I do think it's going to take a little bit longer, perhaps, than the 18-game runway they have here to really hone in this offense. So if there is going to be a downfall for this team, I think it's going to come on the offensive end of the floor, as we've seen of late with the Bulls game and the Cavs game and the Pistons game. It's been not the greatest set of offensive performances here, despite the numbers actually painting the Jakob Poeltl-centric lineups being quite good with the offensive side of things. So again, just something to keep an eye on. This will become a longer-term issue if Scotty Barnes can't take the next step with his threes, or if Pascal Siakam can't find some consistency, level off at like 36, 37%. That's longer-term sort of stuff for the future, but for right now, it's they got to improvise, and the defense has to be as good as it's been. Because, man, it's really good in the half court when they're just kind of they're in their sets. They're even if they're playing a little bit more of an aggressive style, Jakob Poeltl's been able to really clean up a lot of the messes, and that is what's going to drive this team down the stretch for sure. We're going to come back on the other side, get into the desperate need for Nick Nurse to find himself a damn rotation that makes sense, and the need to find some core lineups outside of, I would say, 2 that they have right now that they can kind of count on as core looks for them. We'll get to that in just 1 second, but first, have to tell you about our friends over at Nissan, who are bringing you, of course, the Nissan Ariya Electric Player of the Week. We love Nissan. We love electric players. It's a wonderful combination. Nissan's Most Electric Player of the Week is brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. And this week's player is going to be Chris Boucher, I think. We've had Jakob Poeltl the last couple times out, but Chris Boucher has been awesome. He has been the bright light off of the bench. Last night against the Wizards, had himself a really excellent game. He's bombing in threes. He had 3 of 5 against the Bulls on Tuesday, 2 of 2 from deep, and the just infusion of electricity that Chris Boucher on a heater brings into this team is absolutely necessary and really, really fun to watch. He's fiercely elegant on those transition dunks. He's elegantly powerful when he goes up to throw it down. And he's a really, really electric player to watch when he is on his best. It delivers on all of the things that the Nissan Ariya brings as well. The 2023 Nissan Ariya packs pin you to your seat power and premium intelligence all in one EV. The all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day. Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's dive in now to, I think, another takeaway I had from the game. Nick Nurse getting wild with his rotation, specifically in the second quarter. This was I think the thing that everyone on Raptors internet was mad about last night, and rightfully so. I think there were more reasons why the Raptors lost this game than just the 7 to 9 minutes to open the second quarter, but certainly it put them behind the 8 ball and made it very difficult for them to make enough ground up in the second half against a Wizards team that was trying its ass off. It cost them for sure. The Raptors rolled out some pretty silly looking lineups with, Will Barton as like the lead ball handler in a couple of situations and just his first real run with the team. Played 7 minutes, did nothing, hasn't scored yet for the Raptors yet. We'll see on the Will Barton thing, but you get Precious Achiuwa in these lineups as well, really, really struggling to, and, just kind of screaming for Jakob Poeltl to get sub backed in that second quarter in particular. And Nick Nurse, for some reason, waited until there were 3 minutes left in the second quarter to bring Jakob Poeltl back in. Ultimately, it led to having to play the starters basically the entire second half. And Yak was incredible, obviously, but it's a really difficult thing to not have these in-between lineups that can just save you and save you from having to bring your guys back in and make it so it's not like a puzzling decision when Jakob Poeltl gets some rest, right? Like, obviously guys got to rest here and there, but it was too long of a time on the bench, I would say, for Yak in that first half. And it really, really, they felt it. They really, really felt the impact of it. Thad Young, pretty rough. operating as the small ball center for a couple possessions, couldn't finish on the roll, not much of a rim protector. The rim defense just kind of falls apart when there's no Jakob Poeltl out there. It's kind of stunning, actually, that the Raptors survived around just below 500 for as long as they did without Jakob Poeltl, instead of falling into the doomed tank zone just because of how miserable it looks like when they don't have a real rim protector on the floor. But, you couple that with Gary Trent Jr. having an off night, and just I don't think they figured out those sort of in-between core lineups that are going to work for them. And in fairness, it's still a work in progress. It's newfound depth that they have right now, and Nick Nurse is sorting through things, but there are some obvious, unforced errors, like keeping Jakob Poeltl on the bench for 9 minutes in the second quarter as Daniel Gafford is eviscerating you on the inside, that just don't need to be made. And, I understand completely the criticisms of Nick Nurse and his rotation patterns. It really does come down to, can they find 2 or 3 of these in-between transition lineups that they can lean on? They found, I think, 2 core lineups that are going to be their sort of staples that we're going to see a ton. There's that starting lineup that they've used the last couple of games: Fred, OG, Pascal, Scotty, and Yak. That lineup, I think, is going to be rock solid. The early returns are fantastic. Again, a better than plus 19 net rating in 43 minutes for them. It's a small sample against the Bulls and the Wizards, but those are teams that are playing hard and competitive, very good defenses, or at least, played good defense against the Raptors in both games they played. That line is going to be good. I do think, especially as Fred's shooting comes back around, hopefully, that lineup is going to be something that puts up really good tilted numbers, starts games off well for the Raptors, puts them in a good, favorable position. Then you've got the small ball starters who, again, the returns have been mixed, but they've shown that late in games, that the sort of optionality of having 5 different guys who can score on you, if they can defend well enough, which they've shown the capacity to do in small spurts, that lineup can be a real staple for you as well. It's after that, the combinations of guys. How do you best pair your starters with bench guys around them to really make it work? And this is complicated by the fact that Precious Achiuwa is playing really bad basketball right now. Offensively, he looks lost. I still think he's an outstanding defender. He's had a lot of really great one-on-one sequences against very good opponents of late, but it's just the offense is kind of really, really bad right now. He had a couple of moments last night working in the pick and roll, hesitation, putting up flat floaters that aren't going in, just kind of seeming like he's thinking ahead of the things that his body is doing, and it's leading to all sorts of unforced errors. And that creates a challenge in piecing together these lineups. You factor in that Thad Young's not playing super well either, and the depth begins to look a little less sure than it was. I wonder if we get a call up for Jeff Doughton sometime soon here if the Will Barton experience keeps on being not so hot. Again, 2 games for Will Barton. I'm not too worried about it. We'll see. He's got to get more sort of acclimated to the team. But they did not get enough from the second unit in this game. And ultimately, the lineup decisions don't matter if the guys who you put out there are going to be butt anyway. But you got to put guys in the best position to succeed, and I don't know if they're really doing that. I think Yak and Fred feels like a duo who should probably be together and sort of work off of one another. I think Scotty and Pascal as well work really nicely with one another as sort of the 2 leading guys in a lineup. And you can sprinkle good shooting and sort of complementary pieces that are in around those guys. We just haven't seen Nick Nurse stick with anything for any meaningful amount of time, really all season. There was one stretch in the middle of January where they got a little bit of a bench look with Malachi Flynn and stuff going for a hot second there. But that's really all they've done. And Nick Nurse, it's sort of like the anti-Dwayne Casey concern, where Dwayne Casey would run the same lineups every single game, minute by minute, the same rotations. You could set your watch to it. It's the opposite here. And when you don't have a lot of runway, I feel like you got to just sort of settle on something and let it see if it can germinate into something better and bigger and more effective for you. I don't know, really. Outside of the Fred Yak pair, again, I think Pascal OG works. I think you could even go Pascal OG, Trent Barnes, Boucher as a really good in-between lineup. You give Yak and Fred some rest together. You bring in that lineup. Barnes can be the point guard. You have pretty good shooting around, especially with the way Boucher's played of late. Maybe that's a staple lineup for you. Precious has to be better too. Will Barton's going to slot into some of these lineups as an extra infusion of shooting as well, maybe even replacing a Precious at some point here if Precious keeps on struggling the way he has. But ultimately, Nick Nurse needs to find a set rotation. He needs to find more core lineups that can work. They found two. That's great. They've barely had one all season long. It's nice to have two, and it's nice to have one now with Jakob Poeltl. That's like a real banger of a lineup, it seems like. But they got to find some in-between lineups, and they can't be just pissing away second quarters like they did against the Wizards yesterday. It was just really, really not good to see. We're going to come back on the other side, dig into the good, the bad, and the from the game against the Wizards. We'll do that in just a moment. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, who make the best tasting protein bars money can buy. You've heard me talk about Built Bar for a long time on this show, and it's because they're great. They are a delicious treat. It makes it feel like you're being indulgent when you're not actually being indulgent. It's a wonderful trick they've pulled off. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how to make these bars taste like candy bars, but they do. For me, peanut butter brownie, that's the one, baby. It's got a little crunch to it with the peanut butter. It's got the brownie flavor. It's a really, really winning combination, but they have fruit-forward flavors. They've got their marshmallow puffs as well, which are also delicious. They have granola bars, a whole range of options. There will absolutely be something that you like on the Built Bar list of options. So go check them out either at the website, built.com. All bars, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, whopping 17 grams of protein. Those are some really great details on those bars as well. And like I said, you can get them at built.com, or you can go to Walmart and go pick up yourself a box. Just go to the pharmacy section, pick up a 4-box, and you are laughing. Go get yourself some Built Bars. They're wonderful. All right, let's continue on here. Round out the show with the good, the bad, and the way we round out every single game recap episode here on Locked On Raptors, trying to pick a thing I liked, thing I didn't like so much, and a thing that's got me a little intrigued as a potentially burgeoning trend or topic, good or bad. Let's begin with the good. The good for me is OG Anunoby and Jakob Poeltl's chemistry finally coming into view here. Just a couple of games, 5 games now between those two guys playing together, but it makes sense, right? OG is, I think, the best cutter on the team. He's really good at picking his spots to just sort of get deep position, whether it's cutting baseline, whether it's also sealing guys out. That's another thing I think Yak's going to be able to hit him with quite a bit. But like he's just... OG's a really good off-ball player, and Yak is a guy who's going to make off-ball players very, very happy. And I think, the couple of instances we saw last night of Yak at the elbow, you run an action off the ball, and it just happens that OG squeaks through and is under the basket, wide open, uncontested. That's really great play design, first of all. Really great play execution. And then just, I think, a really understandable connection between two guys whose skills I think overlap quite nicely. And like this is a way you can kind of use space to your advantage in a way where, on a team where there's not a lot of space, not a lot of shooting threat, if you sort of invert the way you work and you work outside in with your big man, you pull him away from the basket, you're not worried about his defender kind of sagging off of him and clogging the paint. He's got to come up. He's got to defend those elbow actions, those dribble handoffs, the things he's running from far away from the hoop. And it kind of creates inverted space where now there's space under the basket for guys to go and exploit. And Yak's a good enough passer and good enough with his reads, he can actually exploit that. So really, really liking that duo. Great to see OG have his game last night. 26, 3, 2, and 2 with a block and 9 of 16. Obviously, Yak was outstanding in this game. Let's just read his line. 23, 13, 4, 3, and 2 on 8 of 9. 7 of 7 from the line. Those two guys were the reason the Raptors did not get completely waxed in this game. They were awesome and really great to see. The bad for me, the transition defense in this game. Our pal Eric Kareen tweeted about it. I believe they gave up 2 points per possession in the first half in transition defense last night, or it was Blake Murphy that tweeted about this. Either way, sorry for the misattribution. But overall, the numbers bear out. This was an awful, awful transition defense game for a team that struggles defensively in transition kind of as a rule anyway. On the season, per cleaning the glass, they've been 20th in transition defense this season. Opponents average 3 points per game added. 3 points per 100 possessions added in transition is the way they calculate it. That puts them, again, 20th in the league. Last night, 10.9 points per 100 possessions added for the Wizards in transition. That would be the number 1 score in the league. by a pretty significant margin. It's really, really bad. They have to they just didn't play hard. It seemed like in those transition sequences, the Wizards played harder. It's reductive, but it kind of feels that simple, and it kind of feels true. Just not a banner night for the Raptors. The transition defense was a nightmare, and credit to the Wizards for exploiting that and making it a thing that they kind of won this game with, because really, you get a couple of transition stops and you get Fred VanVleet hitting a couple extra threes, the Raptors win this game probably pretty comfortably. But not their night, it turns out. Bad transition defense, even worse than we are typically used to with this not very good transition defense. Let's get to the to round it out. For me, Fred VanVleet. It's really interesting right now. As much as this is a stretch of the season where it's about pushing for the playoffs and all of that, it's also about fact-finding and trying to get as much information as you can of what this team looks like with Jakob Poeltl in there. They look like a real basketball team again, which is the first nice bit of information. But the other bits of information you're looking for are who are the guys who are going to be the ones you can have on this team long-term, where it's going to work, where it's going to fit. And I have been pretty staunch in my belief that Fred VanVleet, or someone who has the skills that Fred VanVleet brings to the table, needs to be on the team next season in order to ensure this team is in the best position to maximize next year, which will be another prime season for Pascal Siakam, a full season with Jakob Poeltl, hopefully some growth built in for Scotty Barnes as well. Next season's a big year, and you need to have someone with point guard skills, much like Fred VanVleet has. And because of the lack of very clear upgrades out there, it seems, I've been pretty on the side that Fred VanVleet should be that guy, and you give him the run, you pay him this offseason, you let him be the point guard for this team, because I think he can do it. But I do wonder, been a couple of really rough shooting games for him out of the gate here. 2 of 11 from 3 last night. He was 1 of 11 overall in his debut. Apparently, history suggesting that Fred VanVleet becomes Reggie Miller at the Garden after the birth of the child. That is not holding true right now. That's fine. Whatever. Maybe the heater's coming. But I do wonder how long this stretch will have to continue before the Raptors front office starts to get a little bit squirmy about what that next deal is going to look like for Fred. He was really good in January into the trade deadline. Obviously has 3 games off, new child. I'm not surprised there's some struggle here, rust, all of that. I would imagine he's going to turn it back around. I'm not too worried about Fred VanVleet, and I also just think the way he's played with Jakob Poeltl, it's been really thrilling to watch. He's been playmaking his ass off. 8 assists again last night. I think this is like, our friend Kirtika tweeted this out. Going into last night, it was the most assists Fred had ever had over a 3-game period over the previous 3 games. He adds 8 more to his total last night. Works that pick and roll with Jakob beautifully. It brings a whole lot more juice to the Raptors offense, even if Fred's not shooting. If he is shooting, it's a game changer. And they're going to have to see him shoot, I think, by the end of the season. And I would imagine he's going to, but I'm just watching it. If there's a long stretch here where Fred can't knock down his threes, and he's maybe, working in some of that stuff that he talked about early in the season where he was missing left and right as opposed to dead on and missing short or long, the mechanical side of things as well. All of that is stuff to watch here, at least for the Raptors and for the Raptors fan base, because I do think it might inform exactly what happens with him in the offseason. It might even inform the size of his contract and all of that too. I think Fred VanVleet's very good and very important, but this stretch of bad shooting, if it persists too long, I think it could kind of create some questions for the Raptors front office, some uncomfortable ones. And I don't want to see it happen. I like Fred VanVleet a lot. I think he's very good, and I don't see a very clear pathway to upgrading what he brings to the team over the course of the offseason. It's possible I'm missing something, and that some, shooting heavy point guard is going to be available. But right now, Fred's the best option you got, and he's got to be better than he was last night. If he shoots normally from deep last night, the Raptors, I think, probably win that game. They probably run away with it early, as Fred had a whole bunch of looks. A couple of stretches, too, where just one please fall. There was that sort of broken down stretch of tennis that the Wizards and Raptors were playing in the third quarter yesterday, I think, where it just felt like all they needed was one of these wide open Fred chaos threes to fall, and it's just going to lock everything into place. The Raptors are going to get back on track. They're going to win this game, and they just could not capitalize there. It was pretty devastating in that game. Again, overall, I think his importance is very clear and real, but certainly something to watch going forward. If the stretch continues with the bad shooting, could get weird in the offseason. I'm just, again, it's this is not a definitive thing or anything like that, just something I'm watching. We're going to round it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, really appreciate those who support the show and, do all the stuff you can to support it. You're all the very, very best. We'll be back again on Monday to break down Raptors Wizards 2.0. Hopefully, we're talking about a win and not a very, very frustrating loss. Again, maybe I'll lose my mind if they lose again to the Wizards like they did last night. We will see. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. In the meantime, go make your second listen of the day Locked On Leafs, as the Buds were busy into the deadline. By the time this airs and by the time you listen, they may have already made more trades. Go listen to Locked On Leafs with Mike and Dave, as they are keeping you up to date with everything going on with the Buds in what is a very pivotal season for that franchise, not unlike with your Toronto Raptors, just with, I think, bigger stakes, as they are very, very good. But we'll wrap it there. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.